Today we're going to talk about how to go fast on the foil. Welcome back to my channel, guys. Today I have another tutorial for you, and this time it's for the wind foil. I've been trying to push the speeds on the wind foil for a couple years now, and I think there are some key takeaways that I will share with you today. Some are very different from the steps you need to take on the fin to go fast, and some are similar. So we're going to talk about the gear as well as the technique and the setup to help you go faster on the wind foil. Let's get into the video. So let's talk about the gear first. Firstly, the board. You want to choose a board that is not too wide, because if you take a too wide board, you will have so much pressure because you're standing so far away from the center of the board that it will be difficult to go in the high speed. I'm using an 81 wide board from Futurefly, the Flying Camel, and it's a fantastic board. I can only highly recommend it. 81 is kind of narrow for a board like in the slalom scene. There's even narrower boards for speed foiling, but yeah, I think for the average windsurfer an 81 will do just fine. Even an 85 will work good. The 91 size that used to be very common 1 or 2 years ago might be a little bit too wide if you really want to push the speeds. So one aspect where fin and foil really differs is that on the fin you kind of want to put pressure on the fin to kind of lift the board, and in foiling you don't really want to do this because you really want to be hanging under the sail and not put the pressure on the foil actually, but more on the front foot. And yeah, for me, and this depends a lot on your foil, which we're going to talk about later, this position, we have the nice markings here with Futurefly. And the Patrick foil that I'm using is around 135.5, so right here. And this depends a lot on which foil you're using, like how much power it has and what fuse you're using. So there's a lot of variables to determine this. But basically, if you have the mast foot too far back, you cannot keep the board down. And if it's too far in front, you will push the nose into the water. So you have to find the right position, basically. Then for the sail size, this is really similar like for the fin. The smaller the sail, the faster you will be. And even though water has a lot more friction than the air, the sail is just so big that it makes a big difference if you're using, for example, an 8 meter or a 6 meter sail, or even a 4.8 or something like this. So generally, the smaller the sail is, the faster it will be as well. So if I want to go fast, I'm opting for a smaller sail. More downhaul makes the sail more stable, and stability and not having this up and down movement on the foil is the key to going fast. So if I want to go fast, I'm pulling even 0.5 centimeter more than is recommended, and you can see the sail is opening really nicely on the top. Then another tip is for the boom height, I like to go a little bit lower. So this also gives me more stability because I'm hanging more under the boom instead of standing more upright. And this gives me also more control and makes the foil move less up and down. Because the thing is really that the faster you're going, a tiny adjustment of the angle of the foil will give you so much movement up and down that you really want to avoid this. So everything I'm trimming is basically to make the angle of the foil change less. And then something else that is super important is to have long harness lines. I'm using these 26 to 48 inch lines with a double clamp cleat system. So with these I just have a huge range and can make them as long as I want. I'm usually not using 48 inches, maybe 40, 42. But for me this is perfect, so you can use any long lines of course. But you really want to be hanging under the boom, and this is only possible if you're using long line. And now let's get to the most important part to go fast on wind foiling, the foil. The foil obviously is super important because it's the only part of the system that's actually in the water. And water just has so much more drag than air that what is in the water makes the most difference in terms of speed. So I recently bought this Patrick Eon foil, which is one of the better ones out there. It has super low drag because the mast is very thin, the wings are very thin, and it is very stable. So obviously here, the foil, maybe unfortunately, plays a huge role in what your max speed potential is. If you just have an older foil where the mast is very thick and the wings are very thick, of course you're more limited to what speeds you can do. I think pretty much all the race foils of the last years are capable of breaking 30 knots, but if you want to get up to like 35 or something like this, I think then it really comes down to the foil and the gear in the end. But yeah, I'll show you what I use on the Patrick foil, and obviously here the settings are also very important, so let's get over that. So the first important thing is the angle of the foil compared to the board. I have an angle of about 3.8 degrees, which for me is perfect because when it comes to the angle of the foil, you don't want to have too little angle. If you have like 2 degrees or less, then you will most likely crash when you make a touchdown, because the board is not going like this on the water, but more like this, and you have the chance of the nose kind of diving into the water and you crashing big time. So you want to find an angle that is comfortable, where you don't feel like the nose is being pulled into the water. And obviously too much will cost you a little bit of speed, because then the board is dragging a little bit more in the air. So you want to find, I would say, an angle of between 3 and 4.5 degrees. Also depending on the conditions. If it's more choppy and wavy, you want to have a little bit more. If it's more flat water, maybe you can get away with like 3 degrees. Then the fuselage is obviously also important, because it determines where kind of the pressure point of the foil is based on the board. So I have the medium one here by Patrick, and if you have like the front wing more forward, then you have more power, which is not always good for speed, because the faster you go, obviously the more power the foil creates. So you want to find the sweet spot where you don't have too much power when you're actually going for the speed run. And then the biggest thing you can play with in terms of drag for the foil is the front wing, which is like the mast you cannot change. The fuselage has a certain drag, but the smaller the front wing, obviously the less drag. So that's kind of the big thing you can play with in terms of drag of the foil. And obviously here, the thinner the front wing, the less drag and the faster it will go. Always make sure to tighten the screws correctly. Then for the back wing, I have 1 degree in here. On most foils you can adjust the trim of the stabilizer or back wing. If you're going for the maximum speed, it is important that you don't have too much angle between the front and back wing, as this will create too much power. Increasing the lift of the back wing or stabilizer will increase the lift of the front wing and move the foil balance forward. If you're reducing the angle of the stabilizer, this will decrease the lift of the front wing and move the foil balance back. And here, if you're really going for the maximum speed, I would recommend to not use too big of an angle. Because as you go faster, your foil will create generally more and more lift just by being faster. So if you have a big angle in your stabilizer or back wing, this will create too much lift and the whole foil might come out of the water, because you will not be able to push it down. So now that we did all these steps on the gear to allow us to go as fast as possible, what is the actual technique on the water to go fast? In speed surfing, no matter if it is on fin or on foil, going fast is all about control. And so it is in foiling. And I would say especially in foiling, because the faster you go, the less reaction time you have. And why is that? Let's say you angle the foil because of a gust or a lull or whatever at an angle of 2 degrees. If you're going 20 knots, you have much more time to react and push the foil down again before the foil is flying out of the water. But if you're going 30 knots, you have 1/3 less time, obviously, because the foil is just moving at a 30% faster speed. So angling the foil at 2 degrees will push it out of the water much quicker. The key takeaway is the faster you go in foiling, the less reaction time to have to correct your mistakes, so to say. With this in mind, the key is to keep the foil as stable as possible. And all the steps we take and all the technique I'm going to talk about now is aimed to keep this angle of the foil as stable as possible. Because here in windsurfing, we don't have any systems that adjust the foil, like there's, for example, in America's Cup, where it's done by a computer, or even in moth sailing, where it's done with a lever automatically. We have to do it with our own body weight. And to get into a foiling stable position, the stance is super important, and it actually differs a lot from fin windsurfing. Because in fin windsurfing, if you want to go fast downwind, you have to straighten your front leg and kind of bend a little bit the back leg and get all the pressure through your front leg. In foiling, it looks a little bit different. So if you're coming from fin windsurfing and want to go fast on foil, you have to adapt to a little bit of a different technique. Because as I've said before, you kind of want to be hanging under your boom. And then what is different is you want to bend at the knees. And bending at the knees doesn't mean that your knees become super loose. You still want to keep a lot of body tension throughout your knees. But bending your knees and hanging under your boom kind of allows you to steer the foil by just using your hips. So you want to basically have as little movement in your body as possible. And then hanging under your boom and bending the knees a little bit, just control the height of the foil by twisting your hips forward or back. This will allow you to make much smaller adjustments and keep the foil much more stable as you deal with gusts and lulls and different waves and whatever. So if you manage to adopt this position, we can talk about the maneuver that we're actually doing to gain the maximum speed on the water. And this again is the slingshot. The slingshot is the maneuver where we go downwind basically. A slingshot we do also in fin windsurfing, but it differs, I would say, a little bit between foil and fin windsurfing as well here. Because what I've noticed is that the difference is between foil windsurfing and fin windsurfing that A, you can reach your maximum speed at much lower winds, and in foil you go much faster than the wind. And we have to keep that in mind, because in 10 knots you can already go 25 knots of speed on the foil, which is incredible. So you can more than double the speed of the wind on the foil. And what I've noticed while doing the slingshot, because we are going so much faster than the wind, if I go really far downwind really quickly, I kind of lose the power out of the sail. So what I really try to do in the slingshot on the foil is to try to keep the apparent wind in the sail. And I'm doing this by not going too far downwind too quickly and really reading the gusts well. So what I try to do is I actually have this GPS watch that tells me my live speed on the water. And I try to get to the highest speed possible while I'm on a reach, not going downwind, just going half wind. And only when I've reached that, I go very slightly more downwind. But I don't make as big of a turn downwind as I maybe do in fin windsurfing, especially in the lighter winds. So that's the big difference. So in order to reach 30 knots, I think it's important that you try to reach the highest speed possible, half wind, and then go slightly more downwind. Also, if you make big movements downwind, upwind, this will mess up your stability. And so just making these tiny little maneuvers, this will allow you to have much more control over your foil and slowly increase the speed and keep the pressure in your sail. And to keep the pressure in your sail, what I've also noticed in speed foiling is that it helps to move the harness lines back a little bit, because this will give you constant pressure from the sail and allows you to close the gap much more easily. And I think why I'm doing this is also the same, that in relation to the wind speed, I'm going so much faster, so I can close the sail more than I can, for example, in fin windsurfing. And then the last tip I have for you guys is, if you really want to go fast, you have to try to ride the foil as high as possible. Usually the masts are between 95 and 110 centimeters on the race foils. The more of the mast that's in the water, the more drag you will have. So on a 110 centimeter mast, if you have 1 meter of the mast in the water, this is a lot of drag. And you can see this if you're using a GPS watch like me. You can kind of try around and feel, if you're riding high, that you're 1 or 2 knots faster than if you're riding with a lot of the mast in the water. But of course, you really need to have the control to allow you to pull this off. And what really helps there is to look for a spot or conditions on your spot where the wind is really consistent. Because if the wind is consistent, you need less of your foil to adjust the kind of going up and down on the foil. So in the constant wind, I can ride my foil higher and in turn be faster. Whereas in fin windsurfing, maybe I'm looking for like a short gust to get the quick acceleration for the 2 second. I feel here it's much more important to have the consistent wind to allow me to really control the foil and ride as high as possible. So yeah, in summary, work with your hips, bend your knees, ride the foil as high as possible, put the harness lines back a little bit, keep the body tension, and then you should break 30 knots no problem. Of course, it's a long journey. It took me, I think, 5 years of foiling to break 30 knots, so don't expect it if you're just starting out that it will happen super quickly. It is difficult because you have to adjust the height of the foil all by yourself without the help of anything. And this is the key thing basically in wind foiling, to go fast. Thank you guys for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial about speed wind foiling. It's a very niche subject and not a lot of people are into speed wind foiling. So if you did in fact enjoy this video, I would really appreciate if you left a comment and maybe subscribe to the channel to not miss any future videos. Thanks and see you in the next one, guys. Bye.